I wanted to do another video about the Tower of Babel. I think this is a very important story in the history of mankind. Not necessarily for exactly what people think, but in a much different way, but nonetheless, very, very important. Excuse me. I did a video 2 or 3 years ago at least about the Tower of Babel. And I wasn't saying exactly what it was, I was just saying what it wasn't, because when you actually read the entire book of Genesis a few times and take notes, like I've done, things start kind of appearing, and you start wondering, well, that's not really the impression I had, and I know it's not the impression that someone wanted me to have. I have a long-term Torah project going on that could take years, where I'm reading it thoroughly and making notes, and I'm coming up with this. It's part of a bigger project where I'm working on human history. So I'm using the Torah as a big chunk of that. It's not the only thing I'm using, but I'm using it as a big chunk of it, okay, to compare with other stuff. So when I'm doing the whole Torah thing, I start reading Genesis, and I see that it's just not what it's not what they want us to think it is. But anyway, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into kind of do a recap of the first video, because all that stuff is still true. It's just I'm using it, the conclusion of all this a little differently, that kind of coincides with my last video, that if you just watch my last video. That one was called Tesla Magnetism in Ancient Times. So, but all right, so let's talk about this Tower of Babel thing. All right. The first thing I noticed about the Tower of Babel is where it is in the Bible, because this is very important. I'm using a King James 1611 Bible. I've checked the Torah. I went online and checked strict translations of the Torah in Hebrew and English, and it matches the King James 1611 version. So I just continued using it. So I just continue using the 1611. Now, the reason I want to talk about the positioning of this is it's the 11th chapter. So the first 10 chapters of Genesis, and what they have, I want to talk about that, and then I want to talk about where the Tower of Babel is, and then I want to talk about what's after that, okay? Because this is all really, really important stuff. So let's just go ahead and do this real quick here, okay? And I'm gonna zoom through. That's what I said. I'm gonna zoom through this quick and not read a bunch of stuff, because you can go back and read it for yourself, okay? And I don't have to spend as much time on that. Here, you can go back and just read what this actually says, okay? So we're going to talk about Genesis here, okay? Okay, so Genesis 1 is the creation. Genesis 2, these are the chapters, okay? 2, it kind of goes into the life on earth being created. Okay. 3rd chapter talks about the serpent. Okay. And the 4th chapter talks about children of Noah. I'm sorry, of Adam. And then 5 goes into the generations. He says this is when it starts, you know, how the Bible starts just going into this thing where it gives you all the generations of this person and that person, and that person just goes down. Tries to tell you everyone that was alive, I guess. And then the 6th chapter is when it goes into, and it starts kind of getting weird. It talks about the sons of God with the daughters of men and making these great men of old. So it talks about the sons of God in this chapter. Okay. And then in the 7th chapter comes the ark, because these guys, because God, once these guys, it kind of implies that when these sons of God started mating with the daughters of men, things started going haywire. People became evil and stuff, and God said he was, regretted creating humans and things like that, and wanted to wash it away. And that's when the ark comes. Okay. And then number 8 is the water going down. Okay. And then number 9 is a covenant is established. And this is where God says, this is where, he says to go out and be fruitful and multiply, and all the seeds are yours and all the meat is yours and this and that. Basically gives the earth to man and says that I won't flood it again. And, there's a covenant established between God and Noah and his family. Okay. And number 10, it starts going into the generations of Noah. Okay. Okay. So can you see that? Let's get down there. There we go. I know there's a little bit of glare, but I think you can see this stuff. So we goes. Let me say the first of these generations, when Adam goes to. This is for when Adam to Noah, basically. Okay, it's basically Adam to Noah. And then on number 10, if you read number 10, it goes from basically from Noah to, well, let's talk about that. That's exactly what I want to talk about, because now we're going to, so we have this, okay? So now I'm going to erase this to show you that how it just gradually got to chapter 11. All of a sudden, chapter 11, and if you look at this, okay, chapter 10 through 31, it talks about Shem, who is a son of Noah, and his generations, his family. Okay, so they go quite a ways into it. Okay, from 1030. I'm sorry, that's 1020. I should say 1021. I apologize. From 1021, he starts talking about Shem. Okay, and then it goes all the way to 32. It says, oh, and these are the generations of Noah. Okay, kind of like they completed it, right? And then there was chapter 11. Okay, and this is the story of the Tower of Babel. Okay, but interestingly enough, the Tower of Babel doesn't actually name any names. It doesn't put a single person's name in there. Okay, it just says it was it came from the least on a plain in Shinar, and they dwelt there. Okay, and then I don't want to talk exactly about the Tower of Babel, because we're going to get into that next. I want to talk about its positioning. So now I want to talk about what's after that story. Okay, to 9. So from 11:1 to 11:9, you have the Tower of Babel story. Okay, and then at 11:10, it says these are the generations of Shem, and it actually goes and repeats the same thing from 10:11 to at least another 10 verses. It repeats the exact same thing that it did here, almost. Just uses a little bit different wording here and there. Check it out for yourself. Okay, so I was looking at this. Okay, so they were giving us the generations. Okay. Oh, and by the way, it essentially goes to Abram. Okay, so then this goes to Abram. Okay, from 10, 11, so 11 goes to Abram. It does generations to Abram. Okay, so I was looking at this and I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. You got this story about the Tower of Babel, okay, where humans were basically knocked down a notch. Basically, let's just call it that for right now, right? Humans were knocked down a notch at the Tower of Babel. So you're basically giving us all the generations from Noah to Abram. Okay, so to me, but then there's this cut where it gives you the story of the Tower of Babel. And that specific story, if you read it, the specific stuff that relates specifically to what the story is trying to tell you, there's no names mentioned. There are no names mentioned, right? I found that kind of strange. And then the positioning of it being looking like a cut and paste. Okay, this is a clear cut and paste. They took that story, the Tower of Babel, and inserted it into the Bible. Okay, so they had to know they want the positioning that they wanted it at. Okay, it had to be before Abram. Okay, but it had to be after Adam. Okay, so I think that kind of left them with a problem. They didn't know really where to put it, but they knew it had to go in here. Okay, so they basically cut in the generations, stuck this Tower of Babel story in there, and then started again with the generations and actually ended up overlapping the story of the generations, okay, to leave this huge clue. And I don't know if they left that clue on purpose, why nobody ever talks about it. I have no idea. I discovered this a few years ago, made a video about this a few years ago. Okay, so people might say, wow, that just goes to show you the Bible is just an old book full of fables and stories. No, that's not what it says at all. Okay. Look, every part of the earth is going to have their story about creation. Okay. I'm choosing this one because for me, there's a lot of logical reasons for me to choose this. I don't know that the Hebrews are God's chosen people, or if it's some tribe in the Amazon, or if it's a place in India or China. I don't know. But this is one source that I'm reading. Okay, and this is one story that I'm using right now, and I'm analyzing it because it's a very old story. It's a known story. The translations of it are clear. Okay, it's been passed down for a long time. Okay, so I find value in that. I find value in assessing that, regardless of what you come up with in the end. Okay, so I'm looking at this, right? And so what it tells me is, no, not that this is wrong or someone's trying to trick me or anything. It tells me that these people were sitting here with this story of creation, right? And they had to sort it out. Okay, so a lot of it was sorted, but there's some stuff that had to go in there, right? That's how I see it. So the story of Babel had to go in there because it was something that was passed down. It was really important. That's what it tells me, because the writers of this, the first of creation up until Abram, were basically, in my opinion, I mean, if I'm getting all this right, Abram's when the Jews started, not the Hebrews, I should say. Okay. I think that's when it kind of where God narrows in and says, "You're my people," right? But before that, everyone was God's people, which I think is the only way you can really separate the Hebrews from the rest of the world anyway. So, but anyway, so what it tells me is this story was so important that the Hebrews who are writing this story and have kind of really tailored it towards themselves, like every part of the world probably does, right? This story of the Tower of Babel was so important, they literally cut in the middle of their story and put this in there because it had to be in there. It had to be in there. Okay. That's what that tells me. That tells me that this story of Babylon was so important. It had to be there, that the Hebrews were compelled to cut through their own version of the creation and insert it. Okay. At great risk as far as I'm concerned. So I think that they made a conscious decision to do that, knowing, and probably even knowing, that it's not consistent. Maybe even telling us that on purpose, maybe trying to hide it in an old world fashion. You know, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But the positioning of the Tower of Babel and that entire story is very odd. Okay, you have to take a perspective of that. You got to step back from that entire story, see where it's look, read everything around it, think about what it's trying to tell you, look at it as a cut and paste, go back and read out afterwards. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. It's an absolute obvious cut and paste. Insert that story into this part of the Bible. Okay, very, very important to the story as far as I'm concerned. It tells me a ton about it. Okay. Now, I want to get into the actual story of the Tower of Babel now. Okay. So let's take a look at this Tower of Babel story, right? And the whole earth was of one language and one speech. Now, I found that to be very strange. Okay. Because they said one language and one speech. I think that was consciously said that way. Okay. I think this is telling us essentially that before this Tower of Babel, which was probably long before, it happened so long ago they don't know when it happened, so they just inserted it in the best spot to not kind of screw up their story. So this happened so long ago, but they were of one language and one speech. What is language and what is speech? Those are two different things. We all speak, but we all have a different language. Okay? So the Bible is saying that we were all of one speech, not just one language, but one speech. Okay? That tells me that we had different ways of communicating than just speech, the way we see speech as moving our lips and communicating with these sounds. Okay? So we all had one language and one speech. Okay? So what was this before Babel? Okay, if we speak this way, okay, and we all had one language, now then was our speech actually different before the Tower of Babel? Were we telepathic? Maybe to a certain degree, maybe a little bit. Maybe we had certain motions or something that we did to communicate. But I would venture to say that our communication was much better before the Tower of Babel. They built this thing to reach the heavens. Okay. So if you could imagine humans with a speech and a language much more advanced than what we have now, where maybe even part of it was telepathic. But just imagine, it's the conveying of ideas right now that causes all of this fear in humanity. Okay. I think this is what causes our degradation that I talked about in our last, actually it would be a symptom of the devolving that I spoke about in my last movie, okay, in my last video, where I talk about how we are actually devolving. We're not evolving higher, we're devolving lower. In other words, we're devolving consciously within our awareness of things, but we're advancing with technology. That's basically what I'm saying, okay? At the same time, imagine if everybody on this earth could understand everything that you want to convey, and you didn't have to use the words. I mean, we all have this, we all know that there's this reach for conveying what we're thinking that we don't, there's just no way we could put into words. We all have that. We know that that exists, right? Well, imagine a world where everybody could convey this information in a technological sense, in a consciousness sense. And we all, in other words, basically what you would be doing is everybody in the world would understand everything that everybody else understands. The amount of knowledge would just be, it would just, our abilities would just be immeasurable, really just unknowable to what we have now, okay? We always like to look at things in such a technical sense, but I'm telling you, we're totally missing the boat on that account, okay? We're not getting smarter. We're not. And I think that's what the Tower of Babel is. The Tower of Babel is telling humans, it told these people that wrote this story, that there's this story before us of humans that were just amazing. They could reach the heavens, and they probably did it consciously, not necessarily with a physical sense. Now, there might have been physical things that were needed to do this, okay, but maybe they were trying to replicate the pyramids, as I've talked about the pyramids at Giza before being a huge part of the human evolution. Maybe those pyramids are tens and tens of thousands of years ago. And we happen to be on a down cycle with the awareness, but there was probably up cycles at times, a down cycle, probably a cycle of awareness that we go through. But right now we're going through a downside of this awareness part. We're getting more technically advanced, okay? So I think that the entire story of Babel is not really what they try to tell us it is. And in a way it is. There's enough truth to it. There's enough implications towards some truth, but it's not the whole truth about what it really means to us in our past. And I think that this Tower of Babel is telling us that we are devolving. Our awareness is devolving. And we might be getting smarter technically. We might think that we're becoming smarter as a species. But intelligence and the way we measure intelligence is probably not really, understanding mathematics and the physical properties of things around you is not really awareness in the sense that we know it. It's just not. And I think everybody kind of knows that deep down, that there's this other awareness that we're missing. Okay, but I think that's kind of what the Tower of Babel challenges us to take a look at. It says, look, there was a much, much greater civilization before you, okay? But I think what it says is that I'm not so sure that whatever created us or whatever is responsible for this awareness, just call it the universe, wanted us to be as aware as we were in the beginning, because that probably didn't serve the purpose of experiencing the life that we need to experience. We probably need to experience this, down cycle that we're in, because somehow it is what the universe wants to experience. Okay, so I mean, I don't go into the whole, because I don't really believe in these conspiracies about things. ruling the earth and this and that. It might be true. I don't even know, but I just think that everything is a manifestation of what we are. If you look around, you can see that you know, your leaders, especially in the United States, people talk about our Congress and our presidents and this and that. I'm telling you, those people are manifestations of what we are. That's not going to change until we change what we are. It doesn't matter who you elect. It just doesn't matter. It's who you are. That's the only thing that matters. Okay, it's a reflection of who you are. This is what humans are. We are devolving. Our awareness is devolving. Our awareness in this universe is devolving. And I think that's what the Tower of Babel was telling us. Okay, and they just stuck it in there somewhere, and kind of, they might not even have really understood the story by the time they stuck it in there. You know, you got to understand, when this Bible was created, this was 10,000 years after the beginnings of our devolving, probably. Okay, at least thousands of years. So they might not have even understood the story themselves to put it in here. So they just kind of related it to what they know. You know, you got to keep that in mind too when you're taking a look at this story. But go take a look at this stuff. It's extremely interesting stuff to take a look at. Okay, so thanks for watching, and subscribe and share if you like. Okay.